Today I'm going to be showing you a different approach to controlling the air blast to a forge if all you have to work with is a single speed electric blower. This is just a different option for you. Obviously, if what you're using now is fine and you're happy with the results, then you don't have a problem. But if you do feel that the current system that you're using doesn't give you the proper control over the fire, then this might be the solution for you. Apparently it was quite common in industrial forges back in the 20s and 30s, and I've heard about it. It always made sense to me, but I've never had a chance to experiment with it, so today we're going to play around with the idea. Here I have a makeshift air gate that's set up on a small blower that I have from my dust collection system. So this is how I see most forges set up. This air gate simply cuts down the air supply to the forge. It doesn't really deal with the amount of air that the fan is trying to put out. First of all, you can see how I have to close the air off quite a bit before there's any noticeable change in the air speed. And then once you do see that change, it basically just drops off to nothing. So with this particular setup, there's actually no way to have it just a nice gentle breeze going to the fire to maintain the temperature and not overheat the metal too much. You either have a blast that's a little too hard or nothing at all. Now I have the paper set up on the air intake side of this blower, and you can see the effect that closing off that valve has on the fan. Because the air has nowhere to go, it's actually being pushed back out the air intake, so there's a lot of turbulence going on inside of this fan. Now you have to take into account that how I have this mock-up set up here doesn't really represent an actual setup. This is like a perfect system. That pipe fitting that I have on the end of this blower is a really tight fit, and there's absolutely no air leaks anywhere, so the fan is trying to beat its brains out trying to push that air somewhere. In a real setup, you would probably have leaky pipes or leaky fittings, and that would probably account for some of the air losses that might balance out the system. But even with all that, it does illustrate that there is a problem with this approach. Now this valve setup represents what I feel is a much better approach to regulating the airflow to the forge. The opening to the left of this angled plate is the air that's actually being delivered to the forge. Everything to the right is the extra air that's being dumped out of the system. You can see how this approach delivers a much more consistent airflow because you're not changing the pressure balance within the system. You're just directing the air from one part of the system to another. So it really does duplicate the kind of air supply that you would get from a hand crank blower or a variable speed electric blower. And you can see how this system has absolutely no effect on the air intake. It's just constant. So the fan is working properly and you're getting the air where you want it in the system. So here's a mock-up of what I think is a practical approach for setting this up. This elbow represents the T-fitting that I thought I had, and I was going to use that to represent a T-fitting that would be installed in your air line going from the blower to the forge. So the front side of this elbow represents the air line going to the forge, and the top part of the elbow is the valve that's actually going to control the air pressure in the line. These white cards just represent how the valve works, not necessarily how I intend to make the valve. You can see that as I slide the valve over going to the forge, the top valve starts to open, and that's to release the pressure within the system so you can maintain the airflow and get the control that you want over the blast. This system can be configured in a couple of different ways. You can either use two separate air gates that are tied together, or you can make a specific valve that works very similar to how this paper is doing right now. Since I don't have any air gates, I will probably just build the whole valve from scratch. Regardless of how you decide to assemble this valve, you are going to need to set up an adjustment that is going to allow you to change the relationship of these two valves to each other. You're going to need to find the proper balance between keeping the system pressurized enough so the airflow goes to the forge, but not pressurized to such a point where the fan stops working. Basically, you want to make sure that the fan is maintaining a proper airflow, but you need to make sure that that airflow is going to the forge and not just being dumped into the workspace. So that's the basic concept that I'm working with right now, and I do believe it's the best way to control the airflow to a forge. It gives you all the control that you would have with a bellows or a hand crank blower. In the next video, I'll actually put together a valve and have a pattern for you to work from so you can apply it to your own setup.